Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Just while we're waiting for others to arrive. For those who are watching the recorded version of the lesson later, this lesson is an introduction to the IELTS writing section. And we will discuss in this lesson and the writing 2 introduction lesson. There are 2 introductory lessons. We'll discuss both what can be expected and what the differences are between the general and the academic writing versions. For those of you who came directly to this lesson and are not familiar with the World's English website, if you've not visited the website yet, I highly invite you to do that, and you can find that at worldsenglish.net. And from there, you can review what lessons we have at World's English. You can learn about our teachers, our scholarship fund, and you can also see what courses, what lessons are available. But just real quickly, I'll show you this. So we are talking today about the IELTS section, and this is where you would find those courses. You would just expand this. And today we're taking the free Introduction to IELTS Writing course. And as you can see, there are a number of other writing courses, and there will be more. There are also speaking, reading, and listening courses. If you look for the free courses, those are the introductory courses. Here's the part 2. If you want to see when it is scheduled, just click on the item. You'll see dates that it's available. And on each date, you'll see the time that it's available. And then you can select your choice of time. You'll fill out the form, and that will enroll you in the lesson. And you will receive a link in your email for the lesson, and you will also be invited to take a level test. And you can learn more about the level tests also by visiting the website. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started on our writing lesson. Even though I just sent out the classroom link, I'm expecting a couple students, but so they may come in partway through. But I was a little bit slow sending the link today, so I wouldn't expect them to be here for a few more minutes. But we'll go ahead and get going now. Okay, so looking at IELTS writing at a glance, just an overview. There are 2 parts to the test. And when you take the test, you're going to receive a paper or a booklet that has the questions on it, and possibly it will be electronic. It may even be on a computer. And you'll also receive an answer sheet where you will record your answers. On the question paper, you can take notes, and it's always highly recommended that you take notes when you are preparing your answer. But you don't want to write on the answer sheet. It's most likely a computer-generated or a computer-graded answer sheet. And even if it's not, you don't want a mark to be confused for an answer. So make sure you only write on the answer sheet. I'm sorry, not on the answer sheet, on the booklet or question paper. Okay. All right, so there's 2 parts to the writing exam. The second part is twice as important to your score as part 1. So it's the part you want to give the most effort to. The entire test lasts an hour, and you should be spending most of your time on part 2. So 40 minutes of your time will be spent on part 2 and about 20 minutes on part 1. Okay, now with regards to the academic and general training versions, the tests will be different in part 1, but you'll do the same test for part 2. So based on that, you can probably guess what will be in part 1. For example, the academic version may have things relating to academic type things like graphs and charts, statistics, and things like that. So that's things you'll learn about, how the test is broken down and how to approach that throughout the writing course. And so it's recommended that you continue to complete all the courses for the IELTS exam, especially in your weakest couple of areas, which for many, writing is one of those. Often it's writing and reading that we struggle with. We get more practice with speaking and listening. But it varies depending on the person. Okay. All right, so what have you written recently in your own language? What are the kind of things we write every day? We write emails, of course, right? Maybe write a letter to someone. It might be a professional letter or email, or it might be a personal letter or email. Maybe your brother's getting married and you're writing a speech to give at the wedding. Maybe you want to write a poem for your boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe you're a student and you have to write an analysis or an essay for a class. Or you're a writer. Maybe you're a newspaper journalist and you write articles and reports. So there's so many different ways we can use writing, and we do this in our own language. And the goal here for someone who is taking the IELTS is to demonstrate that they can also do this in English, because they maybe are taking the IELTS to demonstrate the abilities for their ability to succeed in a university setting, in an English-speaking university, or to succeed on the job in an English-speaking company or country. So oftentimes it's for immigration to an English-speaking country. So it just, we all have our various reasons. Okay, so let's talk about part 1. The part 1 is the one that varies depending on whether you're taking the general training or the academic training. Okay, so let's talk about the general training first. In the general training for part 1, you are required to write a short letter. It needs to be at least 150 words. Okay, so something like a business letter, which we can see an example of something like a business letter here. So it's important that you know which exam you intend to take, because there are the 2 versions of the exam. So if you are taking IELTS for the purpose of immigration or a job, most likely what you need is the general IELTS exam. But if you are taking IELTS for the purpose of admission to a university in an English-speaking country, it could be American, it could be England, it could be Australia, Canada, any English-speaking country, South Africa. So IELTS is widely accepted around the world. So even in the United States, where TOEFL was originally the preferred exam, IELTS is also being accepted here in the United States. So your best bet would be to confirm with the person you're providing the results to which exam you should take. Most likely you know, but it's possible if you're getting a job as a researcher or a professor, it might be requested that you take the academic version. So it's important to find out which one you need. Okay, so anyway, back to the parts. So in the general training, you might have to write a short letter of 150 words or more. You'll be given most likely a topic or some sort of prompt to respond to. In the academic version, you'll be given a chart, a diagram, or a map and asked to summarize and explain it. And when we do the academic lessons, we cover this a lot. We especially cover charts and diagrams a lot. We cover directions and descriptions a lot because these are important for being able to pass the academic versions. It's challenging to learn all the language that's used in describing an analysis of a chart or diagram. So we do spend a good amount of time on that. Okay, and what's part 2 like? This is the same regardless of which test you take, academic or general. And you will have to write an essay of at least 250 words explaining your own opinions and ideas about a situation or problem described on the question paper. So you'll be presented with a situation or a problem and asked about your opinion. And it's pretty easy for us to come up with our own opinions about things. So I wouldn't be too concerned about what the question is going to be, but be more concerned about how to structure your answer. So you'll learn about that throughout the writing courses, and specifically when we cover the part 2 question, how to structure your answer for this question. But again, don't worry if you don't have an opinion on the question that's asked of you, you're just going to make one up. So it's not a big concern what the question will be. It's more of a concern that you understand how to structure your answer. Okay. Okay, so here's an example actually. So in question A, we have, these are opinion questions. Some people think that all young people should do voluntary work in their community. Do you agree? Okay, so that's an example of a question you might get. So I'm sure you have an opinion on this. And you'll be required to structure it as in such a way that you're introducing the question and then giving your opinion on the topic and closing that opinion also, or closing that essay. Okay, and our next example is, we all want to live in a clean environment. Should the government take responsibility for protecting the earth, or should each individual be responsible? And again, most of us all have an opinion on that topic. If you didn't have an opinion, you could just pick a side and then choose to answer that as if that were your opinion, and giving reasons why you would choose that opinion if you did. Okay. I don't want to get into too much detail on the responses and how to respond to that now, just because we don't have enough time in this lesson. It's only an introduction lesson, but you should take the lesson on, there's a lesson for part 1, a lesson for part 2, and so forth. So you'll definitely want to take those full lessons so that you can learn how to structure those answers. And I'm going to go ahead and show you. Let's see if I can show you the lesson list. Okay, so for IELTS writing, we have these lessons. We have Introduction to IELTS Writing is the lesson you're reviewing today. And then you would not take the academic lesson if you're taking the general exam. But if you are taking the academic exam, this is the one for you. And any of these that say academic will be for you. And here's the part 1 for the general training. Okay. Then we have part 2. So that'll be our next lesson today. And then here's our opinion essays. So we'll get into detail on those when we do this lesson. These apply to both exams. So if they don't say academic, then they apply to both exams. Okay, so all of these are lessons that you would benefit from taking. And to find those, as I mentioned before, you'll just go to the World's English website, click on Find a Class, book one of our classes, and choose the IELTS section, and you'll see them all listed here. Okay, so simple as that. If you enroll in a level test, we'll create an action plan that will give you a list of those lessons. And then you'll have a list that you can check off. So to enroll in a level test, you'll click on Miscellaneous Services here, and you'll find it right here, Free Level Test. Click on that. The date and time don't matter because it's just a link. So just choose the first one and click Continue and complete the rest of the information. And the level test is also free. Okay, let's go back to our lesson. All right, so our third example, in many countries, people are having fewer children. What are the advantages and disadvantages of small families? Okay, so that's kind of a compare and contrast question, because they're asking you to list both advantages and disadvantages. So that's another type of question, and you'll be learning about each of those types. Okay, now let's talk about the IELTS writing bands and what the IELTS is measuring. It's measuring how well you understand and respond to a question or task. Okay, that's what your examiner is looking for. They're looking for how well you organize and link your ideas and how well you use vocabulary and grammar in written form. So you need to have, it's recommended that you have at least an upper intermediate language ability prior to taking the exam, because you won't be able to succeed in this area, potentially in these areas as well, if you don't have that level of abilities. So that, again, for that reason, it's recommended that you take the level test first. And Just request it on the website and we'll send out the link. It's very, very simple, very easy to request it. Do the best you can on it. If you can't answer all the questions, just move ahead. And then when we create your learning plan, if you need to improve in certain areas before you're ready for the IELTS, then we can work on those areas first and then move on to the IELTS preparation courses. Okay? So important to know your level so that you don't waste your money taking an exam you're not ready for. But by all means, we can help you get ready and get your English level to where it needs to be so that you're prepared for the exam. Okay, so like the other parts of the IELTS, the writing part is graded on a scale of 0 to 9. Candidates who interpret the task well but who cannot use advanced vocabulary and grammar without mistakes will get a band 6. Most countries want either a 7 or 8, and most universities want either a 7 or 8. Okay, so you need to score very well. A band 6 in most cases is not going to cut it. It won't work. So you need to find out what your requirement is by the entity that's requesting that you take the IELTS, and then you will know what score you need to achieve. Okay, excuse me for a moment. I need a little drink. Okay. All right. So about the writing measures, if you had to assess how well someone wrote your own language, what would you look for? Okay. You might look for task achievement, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and coherence and cohesion. And that's exactly what your English examiner will be looking for as well. Okay. We have another task, another sample question. So on the question paper, this is the question you see. More and more people are visiting foreign countries each year. What are the advantages and disadvantages of international travel in today's world? Okay, so you're getting a little bit of background on, oops, I'm moving the whole thing, a little bit of background on the situation and then a question related to it. So Felicia gives a sample answer here. People say that travel broadens the mind, and I agree with that statement. When you go to a foreign country, you have new experiences and meet people who are unlike yourself. So travel is a good thing for the world. Okay, so how well do you think Felicia did answering this question? Okay. Did she talk about the advantages of traveling the world? Okay, I think she did. She talked about new experiences, meeting people, how travel is good for the world, how it broadens your mind. But did she talk about the disadvantages of international travel in today's world? Okay. She treated this like an opinion question. She said, I agree with the statement. And it really wasn't an opinion question, was it? It was a compare and contrast. It wanted to know what the advantages are versus the disadvantages. So she did great on the advantages part, but she didn't list any disadvantages here. So she didn't completely incorrectly answer the question. So that's why we have to read very carefully, and we have to really be aware of how to determine what type of question we are answering. She treated it like an opinion question when it actually was a compare and contrast type question. Okay. Let's back up to that one. That said, also though, what do you think about her language? She sounded pretty good, didn't she? Her English was excellent, her punctuation, her grammar. So I think she would have scored well in that area. Okay. All right, to get a high score on IELTS writing, you need a large vocabulary, and you don't want to spend your time studying vocabulary while you're studying for the IELTS. There are certain terms that you will learn in your studies. For example, if you're learning, if you're preparing for the academic version, you might be learning the terminology for analyzing a graph. But that's the only type of vocabulary you should be learning at this time. You should have all the general vocabulary. You should have the general ability to choose a word or a synonym. You know, maybe have two different ways to say the same thing, so that if you forget one, you can fall back on the other one. Because sometimes under stress, under pressure, we forget. We draw a blank. Okay, so our task here is to match these words and phrases with their synonyms. Okay, so you could do this. Let's see, I guess I can run through this. Go ahead and take a look at it and see what you think the answers are. You can pause the video if you like, and then I will go ahead and put the answers in. Okay. Okay, and there you have it. All right. Okay, to score a high band in IELTS writing, you're going to need to be able to form simple and complex questions correctly. So you'll need to be able to pick out mistakes in a question. Okay, so let's look at number one. Please send me your latest price list. What is the mistake here? It's two, right? Please send me your latest price list. Okay. In my opinion, the large number of immigrants are not a significant problem for our country, despite of there is a shortage of housing at the moment. Okay, what's our error in this sentence? Okay, there's a couple ways you could word this, but of doesn't belong in here. You could say, despite that there is a shortage of housing at the moment, despite there being a shortage of housing at the moment, and you get rid of is also. Or you could just get rid of all of this and say, despite a shortage of housing at the moment. So that's probably the most correct or easiest way to fix that sentence. Okay, how about number three? The percentage of people which is traveling by train in Japan grew up to 20% the following year. Okay, so let's look at this. We have grew and which is. What's wrong with that? because grew is past tense, this should say were. Okay, so which were traveling by train in Japan grew up to 20% the following year. Okay, that's past tense because grew is past tense. What if we wanted to leave this in present tense? We'd still need to change it to are instead of is, right? Why is that? Because people is plural. So the percentage of people which are, I would say who are, traveling by train in Japan grew, has grown. No, only if you were making it present tense, has grown up to 20% this year. So the best answer here, the percentage of people which were traveling by train in Japan grew up to 20% the following year. All right, let's look at number 4. Many people feel strongly that the government can urgently address this problem. What's wrong with that sentence? In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with this sentence. But because the people are encouraging the government, I think a better way to say it would be to use should. Because we all know that the government can, but will they? And so we think they should. Okay. My little windows keep getting in the way. Okay. All right. Coherence and cohesion. In other words, how well are your topics in your sentences linked to each other? Does it make sense? Let's look at this little essay or paragraph. The air in our city has become dirtier in recent years because there are more cars. Last Tuesday, you couldn't see the nearby mountain. Next year, there will be a new tax on cars. In the countryside, many farmers are starting to reduce the amount of chemicals they use on the land. There is a growing interest in organic food. Okay, is this a coherent or cohesive paragraph? Are these ideas linked to each other? How can we improve this? Let's look at it again. The air in our city has become dirtier in recent years because there are more cars. Last Tuesday, you couldn't see the nearby mountain. Those sound okay together, right? But then all of a sudden, we're talking about taxes on cars. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about chemicals that farmers are using on the land. Okay, organic food and chemicals seem to be linked. They're contrasting ideas. This seems like an idea of its own. And then these two sentences seem like they have an idea of their own, right? So how can you improve this? Okay, so that's the kind of thing you'll want to think about. How can you make these work together? How can these fit together? It might be with your introduction sentence about that covers all of them, something about issues that are occurring, but then you're going to, you know, even if you're able to in your introductory sentence or in your topic, if you're able to introduce all these topics or set up for them, you're still going to need separate paragraphs because they're separate ideas. Okay, how good does my English have to be to pass the IELTS writing? Well, it needs to be good enough to get a 7 or 8 band score. There is no pass or fail, but for the purposes that most people take the IELTS, you're looking for at least a 7. So you can't fail, you just score lower than you need for the purpose that you're taking it, and what you need varies. Okay, so if you're an advanced learner, you'll likely get a 7 or 8, even if you make some mistakes. If you're an intermediate student, you'll likely get a 5 or 6. Okay, that's why we recommend an upper intermediate or higher, and if you're an upper intermediate student, you're going to have to work very hard to get a 7. Okay, even an advanced student would have to work extremely hard to get an 8. That's almost native fluency. Okay, the examiner is looking for the ability to understand information and create a well-formed written response to it. Mistakes are only considered serious if they are frequent or if they prevent the examiner from understanding what you are trying to say. Okay, so if you make the mistake once, they might let you off the hook. And sometimes we all slip a little bit, forget an article or something like that. But if you have any kind of mistakes that you tend to repeat over and over in your writing, in your speaking, any of your subjects, if it's a common mistake for you, don't run from that. Face that directly and tackle that problem, because that's what's going to help your score. Okay, to get the best result in my exam, should I read short opinion pieces about current issues today in newspapers and magazines? Yes. Any reading you can do in English will help you. It'll help you learn vocabulary. It'll help you learn sentence structure. And newspapers and magazines generally have very good grammar and sentence structure and paragraph structure. Review the vocabulary used for describing charts and graphs. Yes, you should know this. If you're taking, you should know it anyway, but especially if you're taking the academic version. Use synonyms for words in the examiner's questions. Well, in your response, I guess, if you are able to use synonyms when you're formulating your response, you're going to demonstrate your vocabulary level. So it wouldn't be a bad thing to do that. Just make sure you absolutely know what you're using. You don't want to change the meaning. Okay, use long words even if I'm not sure what they mean. Now this isn't necessary. Long words aren't necessary. Just a variety of language and complexity of language, variety of vocabulary, variety of complexity, sentence lengths, they shouldn't all be the same length. You don't want anything to be constant. You want some variety in there to make it sound natural. So you can use long words, but don't do it often. Don't do it all the time. Read the questions very carefully. Absolutely. This is one of the most important things you need to do. They can be tricky if you don't read and thoroughly understand what your response needs to be, and keep going back to it. Make sure you understand completely. Try to memorize questions and answers before the exam. No, don't bother, because they change the questions and answers. They change the questions all the time, but they don't change the type of question, and they don't change what they're looking for in terms of the structure of your answer or what criteria they're looking for in your answer. So that's what's important. Learn the structure, learn how to formulate an answer that covers all of the key areas in their rubric and what they are trying to grade you on. Okay, allow time to check my work before the 60 minutes are up. By all means, if you can get done before the 60 minutes are up and you have extra time, you can check your work. And the time management is a huge, huge deal. It's highly important. And one of the things we do in the classes, in the lessons, is we practice, practice, practice. And we encourage you to practice with a timer so that you get used to the amount of time you have to complete these. Okay, are you a good writer? Do you enjoy writing? Sorry, I have a little itch in my throat today. What part of the IELTS writing test do you think will be the hardest? Okay, I think time management will be the hardest. Which skills do you think you need to improve the most? That would be the skill, you know, most likely structuring your answers and managing your time. But if you have basic skills that you're weak in, then of course you need to improve those as well. Okay, so that is the end of our introduction to the first introduction to the writing exam. I invite you to come back for the second part. If you are watching the recorded version of this, you'll find either a live or a recorded version in the schedule, most likely. So whichever you prefer, just take a look at the World's English schedule. One last time I'll show you. Go to worldsenglish.net and click on Find a Class. Book one of our classes. I recommend you go in here and book your free level test first, and then go into IELTS, and you have your Introduction to Writing and Introduction to Writing Part 2. Okay, those are both free lessons. If you're, this is the academic recorded introduction, okay. So this is probably general. Okay. So we'll see you soon. Have a good day.